Yes, yes, thank you. Pull it away. Um, I would like to thank my working group members for this lovely collaboration we had. What I'm going to talk to you today about Function B assessment criteria, we had Ken Appleby, Martje Vendener van Vlissingen, who is with us today, Derek Fry, who is also together with us, David Lewis, Katarina Marinu, they both could not attend, as Ken, and Johannes Schenkel, who is also with us. Thank you very much for this lovely teamwork. Without all of you, all of us, we would not have been able to make it. So these are the names of the working group members and their affiliations. I just want to briefly tell you about a chronicle of the tasks, and I would like to thank very much both Anna and Jan Bas previously for making this easy for me. So in 2018, ETPLAS was awarded the first grant, and the first working group was developed to produce guidance on assessment criteria for the learning outcomes of the core and Function A specific modules for persons carrying out procedures on animals. And this produced the first publication, as Jan Bas mentioned. We were fortunate to have with us then Viola Galicioni, who is also with us today, and also Kathy Ryder. And this is the full citation. And in 2021, I'll go through this quickly, the next grant. And from that grant, the current working group 1 was developed. We were tasked to provide guidance on the assessment criteria of the learning outcomes of Function B, specific modules for persons designing procedures and projects. Sorry, my pointer does not seem to work again. Up there. Yes, okay, thank you. Okay. So the work that we did the last 2 years, we developed assessment criteria for evaluating each of the learning outcomes of the Function B specific modules, namely the numbers 7, 9, 10, and 11. So Module 7 has 9 learning outcomes, Module 9 has 7 learning outcomes, Module 10 has 8, and Module 11 has 19. And assessment criteria are statements which specify and itemize the standards that must be met and what evidence will be taken to show achievement of the respective learning outcomes. It also should evaluate knowledge, skills, and attitudes. And these are well known as KSA, or in addition to attitudes, behaviors, and they include, of course, critical thinking. They should also be in accordance with good educational practice and to agreed quality standards. And so after much discussion, we decided to develop criteria for 2 levels of responses: an ideal level, indicated by I, and one that would be acceptable, indicated by A, as a pass level for a learning outcome. And for them to be available, accessible, understandable, and transferable, one of the aims of the Commission document and of ETPLAS. So we produced the task by having face-to-face and e-meetings. We had discussions on the content, of course, and appropriate wording, and discussions and work, each one. And the wording, I must stress this, was very carefully weighed and revised often. Each word of the documents was really discussed, and this made the procedure being revised among us very many times. And the result of the task was this publication of last year, the working group report. We were lucky to have the second time in our working group Derek Fry. And among the issues discussed, I will just concentrate on the ones discussed most, the 2 levels that I just mentioned. We developed criteria for two different levels. The decision for this was taken mainly because of the diversity of experience of the learners. Some may be novices to laboratory animal science, complete beginners. Others may be function A persons moving from conducting procedures to design, starting to design procedures and projects. Other people might decide to do lifelong learning, what is called CPD. It also depends on the learner's needs. Somebody might need to know just basic knowledge, and somebody might want to know advanced knowledge, more in depth and in breadth. And educators, depending on their situation, may select the most suitable level for their local requirements, for their institution, or for what species of animals, procedures they are doing their work. And to explain this better, I'd like to give you an example for the two different levels of attainment. In Module 11, which is the Design of Procedures and Projects Level 2, for the Learning Outcome 11.15, the trainees should be able to, this is from the European Commission framework document, they should be able to identify, assess, and minimize all of the welfare costs to animals throughout the animal's lifetime. And then it goes into detail, including adverse effects relating to sourcing, transport, housing, husbandry, handling, etc. Explain and give examples of welfare assessment protocols. So, developing this into assessment criteria, developing assessment criteria for this learning outcome. On the left, it is the ideal situation, the ideal assessment criteria, and here is the acceptable. So for the ideal learner, we would like for them to provide many examples of negative and positive influences on an animal's well-being at different stages of its life. Whereas for the acceptable situation, we would ask for them to provide at least one example of a negative and of a positive influence. For the ideal learner, we would also want them to provide a mitigation strategy for each negative example, because the learning outcome wants to minimize the negative ones. And we don't ask this for the acceptable level. And also, we wanted them to provide species-specific examples, plural, of assessing animal welfare at different stages, whereas for the acceptable, to provide a species-specific example, singular. I'd like to give another example again on Module 7. So the two levels on Module 7, which is, just to remind ourselves, minimally invasive procedures without anesthesia, and it's just theory, it says the trainees should be able to describe the biological impact of procedures and restraint on physiology. In the previous publication of the first project, we went into very much detail of the accessible learning outcomes, that the candidate should be able to explain that procedures and restraint will provoke physiological and psychological responses, which may also impact on experimental parameters, and that they will last some time, etc., etc. In this publication, for function B persons doing the Module 7, in the ideal situation, we expressed that the learners should have provided several different examples, plural, and related how they show the effect on procedures, the effect of procedures and restraint on an animal's physiology, and in the acceptable level, provided an example, singular, etc. And we decided that the assessment of those preparing to design procedures and projects, function B, the current one with the two levels, requires assessment criteria appropriate to the extent of reflection and critical thinking expected from them. So the text here is broadly written to both encompass and go beyond the assessment of elements given previously for function A persons, which were very detailed. I hope this clarifies it, and it's not too complicated, but we can discuss this afterwards. The other issues that we discuss most, the wording, as I said before. Examples of these: asking the learners to list. A simple listing would be sufficient. Or asking the learners to relate. Some extra text or elaboration on each item on a list would be desirable. The assessment level depends on the variety and quantity of the responses requested. For example, in some assessment criteria, we have the words variety, so we mean a large sample of different elements, several, a larger number, few, a small number, or just one. Another example for the wording that we used for the assessment criteria pertaining to learning outcome 7.7, we wrote that the learners should have listed several ways of assessing animal welfare throughout the procedure and provided an example of each for the ideal situation, and for the acceptable, listed a few ways, which are much less than the several ways. And there are also some assessment criteria which are identical for both levels, ideal and acceptable. So for both ideal and acceptable, in Learning Outcome 9.1, we have requested that the learners should have listed at least 3 views, both levels, on the use of animals in scientific procedures. Another example on wording is the related with a variety of illustrative examples. So again, it's not just the number, but the difference, the different variety of the examples that we would like them to provide. Minimally invasive procedures without anesthesia, appropriate to the species and stage of development. And then in the acceptable level, related with a few illustrative examples. So it's not, so in the ideal, it's not just more or several, it's a variety of. This way of developing assessment criteria for people to develop question formats, and we have worked very closely now with Working Group 2, Madeleine's group, who will talk to you after the break. This allows for flexibility of the question formats. We've thought that this is appropriate for the document to be useful in different establishments and systems, so that these assessment criteria do not indicate the way in which assessment should be carried out, but instead have been written so that all would be amenable to different formats of written assessment. For example, not limited to single multiple choice questions, but including multiple true or false multiple choice questions, extended matching questions, missing word, label the diagram, drag and drop, lists, like I mentioned previously in the examples, etc. So it is expected that the use of these assessment criteria by training providers and accrediting or approving bodies will help harmonize the education and training of those who will design procedures and projects using animals for scientific purposes, may contribute to the mutual recognition of education and training, which is one of the chief aims, and may also facilitate free movement of scientists, similarly. I would like to acknowledge my very warm thanks to our Working Group 1 members. It was an extremely rewarding teamwork, and we really enjoyed it. Here they are, and if I may add, by having 3 members from the UK, this made the wording and the revisions very easier for us as a group, with their expertise in their native English language. I would like to thank Jan Bas Prins and Dominique de Gries for their achieving these 2 projects. The ETPLAS Executive Committee and members of all the working groups, especially Working Group 2, with whom we have worked recently, and the European Commission for the funding of these projects. Thank you very much.